Hello and welcome back to another coaching session from leadershipmentor.com. In our time together this week, I want to share with you some thoughts about how we can create an empowered team. And so I'm going to go through a two-part coaching session really about the overall process from start to end, about some things and components that are so crucial in developing an empowered team. And so in today's session, we are going to talk about what is empowerment. We're going to simply define that. I'm going to outline the three different components that we're going to emphasize that are so important about creating an empowered team. And today in our time together, we're only going to talk about the first component of that, and that is sharing information. So, what is empowerment? Well, empowerment is simply allowing team members to share in the decision-making process. And for those of you that are newer to the role of leadership, don't shut this off yet. I know that sounds like a very scary thing to do, but it's important that we understand what empowerment is. And so if you go through this entire presentation, I think you're going to have a much higher level of comfort as far as really rolling this out to some extent within your team. It is letting go of the command and control style of leadership. And oftentimes we see new leaders that are really very engaged with their team, and the team members are really waiting for direction real time in almost everything they do. And if they're not, it's very procedural environment where what they say is scripted and what they can do is very defined. And so what we want to do is broaden that a little bit, loosen our grip a little bit on what our team members can do, and give them the ability um, to release the power that's already within each team member. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we really underestimate and underutilize team members. We don't think that they can make good decisions on their own, so we make them for them through procedures and guidelines, or we tell them real time just simply what to do. And through this process, hopefully what you're going to realize is that your team members, most of them, are really capable of so much more than what you thought. So what are the three components of this process I want to share with you? Well, the first one is sharing information. Very crucial that we share information that allows our team members to make better decisions. So we'll get through more of that today. And then we also need to create boundaries. And this should put your mind at ease a little bit. When we create this empowerment process, we educate and share information, and then we have to define here's an acceptable range of action that you can take as a team member. For example, probably the easiest way to illustrate that would be refunds to customers. If your team does issue refunds to customers, for example, then rather than simply say either you don't do it at all or you do it, but our standard refund is X, what you want to do is start to create boundaries. And so first of all, we educate them in, what those boundaries are and how to make decisions, effectively around that, and then empower them to make decisions that are within those boundaries. So basically you would say anywhere from say $5 to $50 is where you can issue a refund. And so this would be a process of creating those boundaries. And then finally, self-directed work team. And so what happens around this, as I mentioned, is you are less active real time in managing your team. And for some of you that might sound like a bad thing, but it's not. Ultimately, this is going to provide your team with the ability to think more on their own and to act within these boundaries on their own. Your job changes to coach and to redirect them in how they've made decisions. And so it's not real time, it's more after the fact, but that's where your coaching comes in that we'll talk about. So the first component is to simply share information. More information simply helps your team members perform their job better. And obviously, knowledge is power. So if your team is more informed about maybe what is the impact of doing this. So when I issue a refund to a customer for $50, what does that actually do to the bottom line of the organization, for example? What is the true cost of issuing a free month of service? So we want to share enough information so there's logic behind what they're deciding on. It's pretty simple that what is it that they would need to know? And it's not at this point about sharing the vision of the future. And that should happen, but it's not going to happen in this first part. And so we want to start to share information to our team members that is really going to help educate them about making better decisions. So things like new initiatives, what new things are coming down the pike in your organization? Company performance. Oftentimes we think that information like financials are just too complicated for a frontline person. When in fact, I think you can change the way those financials look so that they can see maybe certain components of that. And in our example of issuing refunds, where does that cost impact the organization? How much has it been in the past? Where's it trending? How does that impact the bottom line? So if there's a 20% performance improvement or reduction in those refunds, how does that impact the overall company profitability? So those are things to think about that I think we can share complex information in a simple way, but it's got to be related to what they do. So crucial. Um, Also, take a look at what you think is confidential today, and financials would probably be one of those things. If you're a publicly traded company, obviously you're very regulated in terms of what you can share and when. So if you're a frontline leader, you need to make sure you get, clearance to share information. But it's important that we stretch that a little bit, and what we view as today as confidential, we may challenge that a little bit and say, well, this is something that's going to help our teams make better decisions. So what are the benefits of sharing more information? Well, obviously, your team members are going to make more informed decisions. I think the biggest thing that happens in this empowerment process is going to be it creates a sense of ownership. Let's say that you have a quarterly organizational meeting and you share financial information. If your team members perform very much out of procedures, so they don't make any decisions on their own, they just simply, if the customer says this, then they do this, and there's no flexibility in what they do. How much do they feel that they contribute to the company's performance? Probably not a lot. But what happens in this process of empowerment as we move along that is they start to pay attention. They start to see that, hey, you know what? Our profitability is going up because our customer refunds are going down, our customer retention is going up, whatever element that you're really focusing on in this process, there's a sense of ownership that takes place with that. And that is very powerful from a team perspective. And then finally, it creates a level of trust. So the more information you share, it's going to create a level of trust between you and your team members and really within the organization. So people will feel like they work for an organization that's a little more transparent, a little more trusting of the information. So that is so crucial. So as leaders, if you're a leader that's going to roll this out, why would you struggle with this? Well, um, if we think that the information is too sensitive, then maybe start out slow. Provide just a little bit of information. And as you go, emphasize the fact that you can't share this information. What's appropriate? Who to share it with? Make sure you start out slow and provide just little doses of information then. You got to learn to trust. And this, if you go through this slowly, you will build that trust. You'll see that they take this information in and they use it appropriately. And then we have to handle issues quickly. So when something happens, we have to make adjustments and we have to address that issue very quickly. So what happens if we think the information is complex? Well, as I mentioned, we don't want to underestimate our team members. They can understand a lot more than what we give them credit for. I also think that we can share information in a way that they can better understand. And so if you draw a dotted line from a decision to where that impacts the organization, for example, that's going to really, the light will start to come on and they'll understand why they're doing something and why it's so important to do it correctly. You can also plan educational sessions. If the idea is that they need to understand financials a little bit better, what a great opportunity to provide some educational sessions about how to read a summary statement, for example. It doesn't have to be a real detailed financial, but maybe you put things in very high level categories and how those things all come together to produce profit. And then finally, relate daily work to result. And we talked about that, the importance of the decisions that they make, how they impact the organization's performance, and that's so crucial. So just some final thoughts in our first session with empowerment. Start out slow. Don't share the grand vision too soon. That'll happen over time. Make time for feedback. This is so crucial, and this is where most of these initiatives will stop and derail, is because we just start down this path and we don't take the time to meet with our team and say, how are things going? What are some decisions that you weren't sure about? What are some things that you did really well that caused you maybe not to initiate a refund to a customer? So maybe leverage knowledge and experiences as a team, share all that together, get them thinking about how can we, in this example, how can we reduce any refunds whatsoever and increase our customer retention, for example. Recognize team development stages, and we'll talk more about this and in this and in other coaching sessions, but it's important that you realize initially this process is going to be a little bit uncomfortable and you have to coach through that process. You have to provide feedback. When they do something really well, you want to reward that publicly. When they do something, make a bad decision, you want to make sure that you handle that appropriately. If you slap their hand and make that a painful process, you're going to see your team stop making decisions, and this whole empowerment thing is going to stop. So it's important that they see it's a safe environment to make decisions, but make them intelligently. And when, as a team member, I make mistakes, I survive that mistake, I learn from it, and I am better going into the next stage. So that is very crucial. Adjust information flow as needed. Sometimes we go too fast with this process. It's too much information. Sometimes it's not enough. And so you have to, again, through our coaching process, we have to see, are they digesting and getting this? Or do we need to stop, pull back, and wait for them to kind of get this part of it before we move on to the next step? So that is it on our first presentation on this empowerment process. I want to encourage you to join our community for free, and you're going to receive the second final coaching session. You can see the second and third components of this process. Again, if you want to share this with anybody, I want to encourage you to do that. I hope you have a phenomenal week, and I hope to see you on the other side.